Rex Granum. I was in the London Bureau from 1995 to 2003. I had one of those TV titles, sometimes in lieu of pay: Director of Television News Coverage, Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and London Bureau Chief, which does not exactly roll off the tongue. When I think back to those days, what I'm most struck with is the dedication and the professionalism of the people in the London Bureau and the people throughout in all of the European bureaus. I had the opportunity during the first Gulf War to work with many people from London and the other bureaus, and was impressed at that time, but particularly so when I was in London. It felt like it was about 10 minutes after I showed up. It was about 2 months. When Israel's Prime Minister, Rabin, was assassinated. And, several of us hurried into the Bureau to start calling up people and organizing this and moving a large crews in groups down to Israel. And basically, before we could hardly get started, people just showed up. They paid attention to the news. They knew they would be needed. They didn't wait to be called. They just showed up at work. And I was very, very impressed by that. This was not just a job to people there. The largest story, certainly the biggest story in my time in London, was the death of Princess Diana. And we learned word of it quite late at night, doing all these things in the course of the night. We chartered, thanks to Sam Gray, chartered a plane to get Jim Wooten and a team over to Paris, although by the time he arrived there, she had died. And came into the Bureau, as did some number of others, trying to organize things. One of the things that most consumed my thoughts, I had this specter in my mind of many hundreds of people coming from the affiliates, ABC affiliates, wanting and deserving some service from ABC News via News One and via the Bureau to do their own coverage. And I remember, pretty sure it was Bruno Rober, saying to him, either on the phone or if you need be, just walk over there. There was a hotel, was and is a hotel across from the Carburton Bureau. And I said, "You'll think I'm crazy," and I'm sure he did. "I want you to reserve all the rooms in that hotel, secure the rights for the roof. That's where we're going to do business. And keep non-ABC News people largely, out of the Bureau. They weren't turned away, but that gave them workspace. News One management came over and ran things. Graham Haddon and Kevin Bates and their team, so-called flew the lines across from the roof of the Carburton Bureau over to the roof of the hotel, which of course they should have council approval for, which would have taken weeks or months and probably been turned down. We just did it and never heard anything about it. By the time the funeral, and of course days of frenetic coverage and so forth, great cooperation from the BBC, extraordinarily helpful. And by the time, though, the funeral occurred, and in the few days ahead of it, we had in town more than 400 people working for ABC News, not the affiliates, working for ABC News. We had Peter Jennings, Barbara Walters, Ted Koppel, Diane Sawyer, and I'm sure others that I'm forgetting to add to that. Huge logistical challenges, a dramatic, challenge to everybody. And it was a superb, people worked flawlessly in an overcrowded, tiny space. The Carburton Bureau had many advantages, and chief among them that it was our place. We could do whatever we wanted to within reason within the Bureau. It was certainly a big success, I think, in terms of ABC's coverage. One anecdote that sort of summed up things to me, or that I enjoyed, was as many of you know, Kevin Bayless, then and now, runs an excellent car service, keeping people squared away and going above and beyond. And there was, of course, a huge demand in terms of cars. Nobody knew where, so many people were from out of London, didn't know how to get around otherwise, and there was also a lot of 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning work. And so Kevin's number 2 at the time, Tony, set up a very small desk down near reception to try and organize the drivers. They would just come into reception area and talk with him and go out and take whoever they were taking. And a longtime correspondent from out of town, came down to Tony and said, "Can you run me over to my hotel?" And Tony leaned back in his chair and said, "Sorry, mate, I'm management now." Quite poignant to me was the last night in Carburton. We put on an impromptu party the night before and invited as many former ABCers, in addition to those still working at ABC, that we could find. So sort of toast the Carburton Bureau, which had served ABC well for many, many years. I had the advantage of having, in the early 80s, visited several months at various times and seen during the time in which Peter Jennings was one of the 3 anchors for World News Tonight. Frank Reynolds, Max Robinson, Peter Jennings. It had seen a lot of service. We needed to move. Disney had, of course, bought the company some years before and was renting something like 20 or 25 different locations throughout London. So the logic of what they wanted to do is pretty unassailable. They wanted to build a building that was theirs and stop paying rent to all these many dozens of landlords, and gather all the Disney people in one place. And of course built the Hammersmith building, and we were required to vacate Carburton and move to Hammersmith, which left us no longer in total charge of our building. We did have other people trying to tell us what to do. And on this final night, it had been arranged for Friday night, the 11th of June, 1999, with the belief, or at least hope, that would be a quiet time to switch over from Carburton to Hammersmith. And of course, Hammersmith, with the great work of Graham Hadden, Kevin Bates and others, was the first digital bureau at ABC News, and kind of an experiment. Not kind of an experiment, it was an experiment, and on a large scale. And the hope was that things would be slow on that Friday night, and we make the transition seamlessly. And news, of course, raised its head. The Kosovo War had ended just recently, and both the Soviets and NATO troops were to jointly go to the airport, Persena Airport, and be a peacekeeping force there. The Russians beat NATO to the punch, and all of a sudden it looked like quite a confrontation. It eventually ended up being settled amicably, but we didn't know that at the time, and it was a Friday night, our time, still afternoon in the States. And Mark DeJersey was the only person on the desk. I joined him, and we were working on the desk, all these frantic calls, all this craziness, the last feeds. I think the feeds went from Carburton through World News Tonight. One by one, then the lines were switched over from Carburton to Hammersmith, and the transition appeared seamless, but it was, sort of crazy there for an hour or two. And I remember leaving at like 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and it was almost deathly silence. I think DeJersey was the only, staff person left in the bureau that still had a security guard downstairs. And I just thought it was really fitting that this bureau that had seen so much and gone through so much had big news on the night that it stopped being part of ABC. Well, Hammersmith was a big change. Going to Hammersmith for ABC News was a big change for all involved. I don't think they ever quite understood what the news division was doing, and we didn't always understand what some of the other individuals and other businesses were quite up to. As I alluded to earlier, at the Carburton Bureau, within reason, if we broke no laws, we could do just about anything we wanted to there, and had the freedom to change as needed. At Hammersmith, it's just an entirely different situation in which we were one of many business entities housed there. Certainly was a much larger bureau, which I gather has been made much smaller again. New equipment, as I mentioned, the first digital bureau for ABC News, and it was just on to an entirely different world. Not necessarily a bad one, but different. Now the next year, I was just in my office, sort of minding my business, and Andrew Morse from the desk popped in my office and said, "Rex, you need to come see this picture." And I went out to the nearby desk. And initially, we both thought that it looked like a small plane flying into a smallish building. But of course, it was a big plane flying into a very large building. And September 11th, of course, and just a sad time, for the world, and a frenetic time again for ABC and other news organizations. We scrambled a team. Bob Woodruff was the correspondent, and got them down to Afghanistan that night. By that night, they were broadcasting live. One of our two other competitors, I think it was CBS, did not get to Heathrow in time. And I'm just happy that we did. There was, of course, then an hour-long world news each night. Ted Koppel had been on vacation in, I think it was Italy, and therefore with the ban in terms of flights between, going into the States, the shutdown of the airline system in the U.S., Koppel could not get back to the States, so he came and did Nightline from London. So it was quite a busy time, and of course continued on for many weeks and months. I think that the biggest challenge daily was trying to anticipate what was needed by the broadcast, and a lot of times I felt that it became a logistical game. If we got the team to Heathrow in time, we were smart that day. If we didn't, we let them down. It's anticipating. And often having to act, as all news organizations do, but having to act on pretty scant information before, because it's just the vastness of the territory. I had before that been in the Atlanta Bureau, which is Atlanta, Dallas, Miami, and Central America, and we had a little more flexibility there in the sense that these were several hundred miles frequently, and we had freelancers in any number of places, and that just was not the case in terms of the vastness of the coverage territory. Well, to me, the most enjoyable part of the job, were the people. A lot of people had a great sense of humor. I'm sure I remember things more favorably than I might have at the time. There were some difficult situations, but I enjoyed London. My family enjoyed London. My older daughter, who was 15 at the time, basically after a few weeks there decided she was British, and she went back to grad school at LSE and is married a Brit, lives in London. Younger daughter from the 5th grade through high school, and really grew up in London. It was a delightful time for my family, and professionally, my most rewarding time at ABC. And just to sort of sum up my thoughts, again, it's the dedication and professionalism of the people. I really like the people. I still to this day miss many of the people, and just to as I haven't really talked much about the other bureaus, it's hard to do individual stories, and I gather that you'll be doing some of that for this exercise in terms of people from other bureaus. But it's just an impressive group. Lived through some great times, some pretty bad times, some deaths, and joyous times. So it was just very pleasant memories, as one frequently has when you look back. So.